Hello, everyone. Welcome to the new live session of Software World with Jimdo. This is a session where I invite people to talk about different topics in the software world and tech industry. I'm Jimdo, your host today. And today we will talk about being a generalist software engineer, its challenges, its disadvantages, and its advantages as well. Today, my guest is Ricardo, and Ricardo is a software engineer at Jimdo. Welcome, Ricardo.
Hello, Jens. How are you?
I'm great. What about you?
I'm good too. Thanks.
Yeah. So, Ricardo, could you talk a bit about yourself? So, can you introduce yourself so that our listeners they can get to know you better?
Sure. Yeah. My name is Ricardo. I come from Brazil originally. I live in Hamburg, Germany right now, and I started my career in 2005, like as a software developer. So around 15, 16 years ago. And I've been to a few different positions, like I was a developer, manager, software architect, and even before that, I had like some random jobs, like I worked with 3D modeling, which is like completely out of software area. So yeah, and I like to learn new things, and I like to explore new things and learn different technologies. That's why I guess I'm considered a generalist. And yeah, I guess that's why I'm here.
How did that happen? Like going out, or maybe did you start out of the software industry?
No, actually, I started working when I was 16.
Yeah.
And I worked first in an office, like doing random office work. But after that, I worked in an architectural office, like building architecture, not software architecture.
Okay.
And then, yeah. I always liked computers, so I started exploring like different softwares, and then we did like the office didn't do 3D modeling of houses then, but I was curious, so I got interested in this area, and then I started doing some like on my own free time, and then they really liked it, and then they started offering it as a service, and then yeah, we started like also besides like the normal plans that we made for the homes and office that you need to do legally. Yeah. Then we also presented those 3D models that looked like pictures, and then the client was really satisfied because they could see how the house would look when it was ready. So yeah, that was pretty cool, and I learned a lot. And it's not something that I use now for work, but it was fun to work with this.
It's interesting. So having many interests, this is that's why it's interesting for me to see, because when we talk about the generalist, I also consider myself as a generalist, and because I'm also kind of a specialist, but we will come to that a bit later, I guess. But having many interests is actually something that is in our heart. Some people, even though they might say they are specialists, I believe that they have many different interests, but they don't have the same interest in maybe software engineering. So how do you feel when you have these many interests, or how do you manage those actually?
I mean, I think there are two kinds of interests. There's like the personal ones about like random things that I read about, or that I watch things about, or that I hear podcasts about. And there are work things. And I think they're kind of related because my interest, I'm curious about a bunch of different things, and for everything that I like to try different, like completely different things. It can be like movies or software or music or whatever. I don't usually go like to one specific type of art or style or whatever. I guess this also applies for work because I'm curious. I'm always reading about like new technology and trying out new things that I've never tried before. And I guess, I don't know, maybe it's like my personality that made me go into this more generalist approach, because I like to discover new things. So I like to, instead of just focusing on one thing, like a really specialist in one thing, I like to maybe see other areas. So yeah.
So, okay, let's define first. What's a generalist software engineer for you? Is it like a full stack developer?
I don't think there's exactly like, I don't think you can just like put people into like, oh, this is like generalist and this is a specialist. I think there's levels, and I think like everyone is like somewhere in the middle. No one is like a complete generalist, because then you're not like, if you don't really know at least one thing well, then I guess it's really hard to become a developer, like a successful professional developer. You need to know a few key areas, I guess, well.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you cannot just know one thing. Like even as a specialist, you still need to know a lot of like general things. Like no matter in which area you work with software development, for example, you need to know a little bit about databases and testing and programming logic. So some things you need to know, even if you're like a specialist in one language or something. But, and also I think there are levels. Like for example, you could consider, for example, someone who does only Java backend development, for example, then they are specialists in Java backend development. They're like really specialists.
Yes.
But even then, like I said, they need to know, for example, database modeling. They need to know how to connect to the database. They need to know how to write tests. They need to know how to monitor the systems. They need to know, like a bunch of different areas that are correlated to development that everyone has to know basically. And
does everyone has to know that one? I'm thinking like, so I've been an iOS engineer for, I don't know, 6-7 years, and 6 years, I guess. And then I always like try to learn everything as much as I can on iOS. You cannot learn everything, of course. But once I try to learn backend make this kind of a switch, then I realized that I'm not an iOS developer. I cannot say that I'm an iOS developer because now I know different things. The one thing you said, I think this is the important point where people forget about or also confuse when they talk about full stack development, because as you said in the beginning that the one specialization is kind of needed in some area, then you can start becoming a generalist software engineer. I highly agree. You cannot go directly try to learn everything or like, I don't know, maybe 6 different things at the same time. You need to be a specialist at one. Which one was it for you actually? Like, where did you start?
I started the company that I used to work for. They were like a really traditional company that made ERP system. And it was like really big, really, really big, like many millions of lines of code. And because of that, it was like started in the 80s and then 80s, yeah. And they still run it. They still sell it. The company is still like pretty successful.
Using these cards?
Sorry?
The programming cards? I don't remember the name.
No. It's like old, but not that old. But like they still use Pascal for like most of the code is still Pascal. And still. Pascal not for new things because now they have like web. Some parts of the system are web, some part are mobile. Then they use like specific technologies. But like for the core ERP, most of it is still Pascal.
I heard that Pascal developers are now getting a lot of money because they are really rare and there are many systems.
It's funny because like this happens to a lot of languages. Like this happened to COBOL first, like especially with banks, and Pascal, and like some really specific. They also use like PL SQL, which is programming language for Oracle database, and that's like if you want to go like if you know those languages and if you are willing to work with them, then you can get like a really like successful career. But then on the other hand, it's like basically stable technologies that don't evolve that much. So
boring technologies.
You have to have those profile that like I'm going to do this for like the next 20 years and nothing's gonna change. Then you are like a really specialist in this case. And that's how I started. I started as a Pascal developer basically and PL SQL because they also used Oracle. And at the time, like it was desktop programming, so there was like no concept of full stack for us because it was desktop. There was a client, there was a server, but usually we did both. So but even then there were people who preferred the front end, like doing the desktop screens, and there are people who like to work on the server. But the difference that the language was the same, like it was Pascal on the whole stack. And so I kind of was like kind of a specialist in the beginning because that's all we used and there was no other option.
So you started with Pascal, but what do you do now? Like what are the things that you are using at the moment?
Yeah, like you know, I'm switching teams again. I've been to 4 different teams, and if every
In one
team
company?
has,
Yeah.
yes, in one company in less than 2 years that I've been here, and we like each team uses a slightly different stack, but I guess like usually the things that we use the most are Kotlin on the
Mm-hmm.
backend, TypeScript also both on the backend with Node and on the frontend with React,
Mm-hmm.
and a little bit of Python and some like other random languages that sometimes you need to touch. But I guess like TypeScript and Kotlin are the main 2 ones.
Yeah, some other random languages are a good saying, I would say. Like, yeah, you just see them like sometimes seeing Clojure or Haskell or something like by a surprise, saying, "Ah, there's a small service here written in Haskell." It's like, okay, yeah, but you need to grab that, right? So that's the point. You need to work on that one because
Yeah,
someone wrote it at some point with some
yeah,
decision. You have no idea, you don't have the context, but you need to work on that one.
yeah.
Yeah. So, what was the hardest part for you? Like having, like learning your first language, or maybe there's some point in your life that you became as a generalist developer, and then but you turn back and you say, okay, I learned this very well. This was okay, easy, blah blah blah. But the next one, when I started learning this or focusing or changing my career into this one, it was very very hard. Do you have some point like that?
Yeah, I started as like with those 2 languages basically, Pascal and PL SQL, but I get bored like if I do the same thing for long, I get like really bored like really quickly. So after like a couple years doing this, I got like really bored and I didn't want to do the same thing again anymore. And then I started exploring different options. For me, I guess like the hardest part was when I went from desktop programming to web programming, basically because it's like completely different. Everything is completely different. Even though like some of the concepts are the same,
Yeah.
but writing software like it's very, very, very different. That was pretty hard. But today it's pretty common that like if you want to be a developer today and if you want to do like front end, either you do web or mobile. So right now it's pretty common, but back in the day, like 15 years ago, desktop was also pretty common. So that was also like a path that some people chose.
You also do the mobile, right?
Yeah. I also I work like with mobile also in this company for like a couple years, doing also like full stack on mobile, both the mobile part and also the backend part. And at Jimdo also I did like we jumped together in the mobile team, and then I also did some like small work on the front end, even though I was a backend developer then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For the story, we started working with Ricardo in mobile team, and he joined us as a backend engineer, and then he switched teams to go to another team as a backend engineer, and then he switched again, and now he was switching again to join another team. So that's like a background story for Ricardo in one company only. That's why also Ricardo is joining us here today. Not even being a generalist in overall, like in the career, it's like also generalist within the one company. So, and we are not a startup. Yeah. So we are like a bit established company. I think we are almost 300 people at the moment. Yeah. So yeah, we said startups, but I want to go back to this a bit, the full stack developer position, because people think like when people hire with full stack, they like when I check the job ads and etc. I see, I don't know, 10 different points as a requirement saying that, okay, you need to know this, you have to know this, and you have to know this one too, this one too, this one too. It's like, hey, like you are hiring a whole IT department, not a one person. And if you find the one person doing all of these listings, then you have to know, I don't know, pay maybe $500,000 per year minimum, because that will be your IT budget. Like a minimum, like in a small team. So so the startups and full stack development, what I want to talk about a bit, because some people think that being a full stack developer or saying that they are a full stack developer is like a fraud, because basically you are saying that you are doing many things at once. Like, is it this case? Or I'm really curious about, because I'm not a full stack developer and I cannot understand very well, even though I'm a generalist, that selling yourself as a full stack developer, saying, okay, I can build systems from end to end, basically. This is a claim. And I can do it very well. How can you do it? I mean, how is that possible?
I mean, again, I think most people are specialized in one area. So even though, for example, I am a full stack developer, I know how to do backend, I know how to do web, I know how to do mobile, but I'm much more productive on the backend than I am on the front end, for example. I think it's really because everyone has limited times, and like no matter how many years of experience you have, like it's impossible to know everything about everything, of course. So you need to prioritize. And I know a lot of people that are full stack, but all of them are either focused on the backend or on the front end. I think the advantage of hiring full stack people is that you have more flexibility in your planning, because if you have more demand on the backend or on the front end, then you don't have to move people around. You have people to just like one person, even though they're like a backend developer, if there's a lot of work to do on the front end, that person can do it. I think that's an advantage. But like I wouldn't expect everyone to be super productive in like every part of the system. That's like I don't think that's possible. I think you can be like decent. I consider myself decent in at least like all those like layers, but I'm not as productive on all of them.
Yeah, when I also see the full stack developers, most of the time they are, I don't know, for example, they are specialized in JavaScript, let's say, and they are doing JavaScript from end to end, because if you choose one language and 3 or 4 frameworks, if you learn, then you can do an end-to-end job. That's also possible. But what I see on software engineers is that our job in general is solving problems in a best way that we can. But once you start becoming a full stack engineer, it starts becoming like, again, specializing in one part. For example, a language, JavaScript is, maybe you are specialized in JavaScript. And then you start working on only in JavaScript, but sometimes your solutions are in totally in different tech stack. And being only in one area, being a software, like full stack software engineer, for me at least, it doesn't make sense. I mean, you can say that, okay, I'm fluent in backend, or I know I have decent knowledge in, I don't know, maybe in front end, but still it doesn't fit into my mind saying that, okay, you are claiming that you are a full stack engineer, but I don't really believe that you can solve the problems really efficiently, because it might require some different tech stack. What do you think about it?
I think actually the language, I would say it's not so important, because if you know JavaScript, like you can know JavaScript, but to work on the front end and to work on the back end, it's like completely different. It's completely different requirements, because on the front end, you're running code on the user's browser basically, or on the mobile, for example. And in the backend, you have to have a server that will serve multiple users in parallel, and the requirements and the way that you do things like is completely different. And I guess I don't focus on languages that much, even though like I have like a couple languages that I think I'm more productive than others. I don't think like language choice is that important, because most languages are similar, and most concepts that you have are similar across the languages. Of course, there are like some specific ways to do things in specific language. For example, concurrency is really specific to every language. But the main concepts, if you learn the main concepts well in one language, and if you know how to write like good code in one language, then I think it's easier to translate to another language. So yeah, it's hard to say like, oh, like if someone knows JavaScript and then they install Node and then they build a server with Node and then they're full stack. I don't think that's necessarily true, because you need to learn how to do backend code, for example. It's not just a matter of learning the syntax of how to write a server on Node. Like you need to know how to make it like secure, for example. You need to know how to make it fast. You need to know how to make it scalable. And there's like a ton of different things that you need to also know in the backend that are not concerns sometimes are not concerns in the front end. So even if you know the language, it's completely different.
And how do we choose that? Like, how do we choose which language, or how do we choose which technology that we are going to use?
I don't know, like for me, what I like to do every time that I don't usually learn things just like languages, for example. I don't usually learn them just because I want to learn. Usually I have a project or something that I want to build, and then I will search for the best tool or best language or best framework to solve that particular problem. So
How
I
do,
don't
how
know.
do you find out the best language for that problem,
Usually,
or technology? I don't know.
if I have time, usually I do like a proof of concept. In like first I do some research, I search and then see like what are the most used ones, what are the most popular ones. I search, for example, Stack Overflow to see how interested people are in that. Because I think for any language or framework to be successful, you have to have a community behind it.
Yes.
And it has to be open source. That's like non-negotiable. So
Not anymore. Yeah. True.
yeah.
True.
And then like after that, maybe I choose like one, two or three, or if there's like a clear winner, usually there isn't because and then I just like try out. I do like some really basic stuff in like a couple of them, and then I see like how hard it is, how hard it is to get started, and what the official docs look like, and if I have a problem, how easy it is to get help, and how the potential of that, if it's like something that just started and has potential to grow, or if it's something that was popular in the past and maybe it's not as popular anymore, so it may be like abandoned in the future. So, but I don't have like a clear way to do it. Mostly I just try it out, and what feels best, I adopt. And yes.
Yeah, I'm thinking, okay, so when you have time, yes. When you don't have time, do you just go the one that you know the best?
Yeah, sure. Like if I know the technology already, for example, if I want to write something on the backend and I don't have like any like super specific requirements, usually I go with Node and TypeScript because that's what I'm most comfortable with. So yeah, that's definitely, if I already know it, then sure. But for example, a month ago or something, we had a hack week at work, and I wanted to do something like completely different than I normally do. And I work on a machine learning project, which is something that I don't know a lot about. And then I basically started from scratch. I didn't know anything. Luckily, I had like very good people to join my team. And then, but even then, it was interesting because there were people like they were doing the same thing in parallel using two different technologies because they also wanted to try like specific frameworks or something like that. And then I also learned like two different ways to do it. So in this case, it was really fun because in a couple of days, we could do something like that worked somehow, like a proof of concept. And working with people who knew the technology was a great way to like see like the pros and cons, and both like from a market perspective and also a technical perspective, because even between them there was also discussions, but like this is not so used, like it's much harder to get help, and but it's more powerful, like this is faster, but it's harder to do, and this one is more people use it, but maybe it's a bit slower and it's a bit harder to use, but it's easier to get help, and but there's no clear winner. Both of them are like, in this case it was like Python and R. Both of them are really popular. You can do things
for machine learning. Yes, both of them are very popular. I think the use case for R and Python is only different, like more different on the previous programming language knowledge of the person. What I've seen is that the R is more preferred from the people who doesn't have a programming language background, or like the maybe engineering background. And with the people who has the engineering background, they tend to go with Python. That's what I see in machine learning. I don't know. Yes, this hack week is a good example because it's the place that you have the experience of. You have the time basically to hack some things out, and there is no limitation basically, and it helps a lot. But as you said, like there was like a lot of like talk. This one is better. This one is faster, and this is one thing that I also find it hard because when you start working with like specialists people, they have an opinion. They generally have a strong opinion on one thing, and convincing them to do something other than their expertise is very hard. So like, I'm now curious about how do you deal with those engineers?
Yeah, I don't know if you know like Maslow's hammer or the law of the hammer that basically says like if you only have a hammer, then everything becomes a nail.
Ah, yeah.
So if you only know one tool, then you try to use that one tool to fix everything.
Yeah.
And like I've seen like more than a few times this happens. Like this happens a lot with lots of different situations that if you have like those hyper specialists, like people who only use one language and they want to use it for everything. I think this is pretty dangerous. Like lately, I haven't seen it so much because I think like people here are really more mature and then they are specialists. Like I know people who, for example, are really specialists in Kotlin, but there are some cases that they know that Kotlin is not the best way to do things. So they can choose another language or another tool. Mm-hmm. But some people I've known and I've worked with some people that are really like, I don't know, hyper specialists or something, mm-hmm. that they wanted to solve everything with a single language. And that, I think that's really dangerous because the person, if they do that, they kind of close themselves and they don't want to learn something new. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really dangerous. But other than that, I think it's pretty good too, because working together with specialists is really good because I know like front-end and back-end, for example, in web, I know mobile, but like I said, time is limited for everyone. That means that like while I was like studying mobile, studying web or something like that, someone else was like specializing only on the backend and then getting like really, really, really good in the backend. So it's really good to work with specialists because if I have a problem on the backend and let's say, oh, I want to make I want to really optimize this because this needs to be really fast and there will be like millions of access and something like that, then you can ask those specialists and then usually they will know how to do it in that particular language because they're experts on that. So I think it's really good to have that balance. I think it's good to have balance of like generalists because if you have all specialists, then everything like becomes a struggle because everyone will defend like their side and will want to use their language or their technology or want to do things their way. But if everyone is a generalist also, like everyone is okay at doing a lot of things and maybe no one is like really good at doing like this particular thing that you need to do. So I think having a balance is really good. And I really like actually working with specialists because I learn a lot from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Most of the, like many things that I learned like in like deep knowledge about something was because I worked with specialists and then we could like trade knowledge and that's pretty good. And one thing that bothers me a bit that this like still happens is that if you work with someone who is really passionate about one particular language and then you do something like the code works, everything looks fine, everything works fast, everything like it's easy to understand, it's good code, but then people say, no, but this is not the way that this language is meant to work. Like you have to write code like this. And this sometimes bothers me because some languages have like really specific ways to write code. Mm-hmm. And then if you write it like if you write it like you think is correct, then people will say, no, you have to write it this way. Mm-hmm. And this is something that bothers me.
Yeah, I think we also need to separate the specialists from opinionated people. So people might be opinionated, but they might be also generalists as well. So like it's a totally different point. But my question, or like because that's the point where I also see a lot of people are struggling, is that talking about the conflicts of like, for example, if you're a generalist, let's say, and you are an unopinionated person that you are okay with everything, you just want to do the best job that you can. And there's on the side, there's a specialist who knows one thing and then they're expert about it. And you think that the solution is in some other language than their expertise, let's say. And they want to do it in their expertise because they think it will be faster in the long short run. But you think that the solution is better in a high quality in the other one. How do you like approach to this conflict? How do you try to resolve them? Since you already has an experience as a manager, that's why I'm also asking, how do you approach these situations?
Yeah, it's really hard because I've worked with teams that I tried both approaches. I tried like let's try to have like a consensus and everyone uses the same technology and everyone is happy using the same technology. And I also work with teams that like each person does what they like, each person uses what they think is best, and then everyone is happy because they use what they like. But in the end, you like in the first case that you are forced to use a language that you don't like, then everyone is not so happy because they are forced to use something. But on the other hand, if you let people just like run loose and use whatever they want, then it's really hard because I don't know, maybe they are the only person who knows that language. And then if they leave the team or leave the company, or if they need help, or if they're on vacation or something, then no one can touch that code. I think both situations are a problem. And I think you need to find a balance. Like, I think you need to, if you need to change it, like if you need to introduce a language or if you need to introduce a technology, I think you should try to convince people that that is a good option and why it's a better option than what we already have right now. And with facts, like not just because you like it, like, I don't know, like, let's switch from, I don't know, use Kotlin, let's switch to .NET, for example, with C#. I mean, you have to really convince me that that's like the best option for you, for the company, for the team. Like, what's different? Like, is it just because you like it, or is it like, is there like a concrete fact that C# is better than Kotlin because of this, or it's just because you like it? Because most people are opinionated, and even generalists. I'm a generalist. I'm opinionated. You know that I'm opinionated about some technologies, like on the front end and on the back end, because that's what I'm familiar with and that's what I use. And yeah, I've tried a few of others, and maybe I have a problem with them. But then I always try to present like I like this because it has this characteristic that makes it better. Versus this one that I had this problem with this. I tried to use it before in a project or something like that. And I think when you come up, like if you present something in like an impartial way and you present both the pros and cons of it, I think it's easier to convince people because they know that you also know the downsides and the dangers of using that. And sometimes people are really passionate about something and then they say, no, this is the best thing ever and it has no problems and it solves everything, it's better everything, it's faster, it's easier. Then I get like really skeptical because like it's impossible to have something that's that much better than everything else.
Yeah, I go one step further and not being only skeptical, I'm also most of the time being annoyed by these kind of things because it's like, yeah, I like it. Congratulations. Yeah, you can continue liking it but on the other side that I have no reason to like it because I need reasons. I generally like suggest people writing it down what they are thinking about, and also I'm not sure about this, but I like to propose people to find like one or two alternative solutions to their problem, so they're not really opinionated, or even if they are, at least they consider some alternatives. This helped me a lot for like when talking with specialists, and I was a specialist once, and as I said before, and at that time I was also a bit more maybe on the junior side, and I was learning how can I communicate in a better way with others who are more experienced than me as well. And this is the best way I found, like writing it down, everything.
Yeah, that also is a good approach.
Yeah, but still, we have a lot of people who are very opinionated, and they are very specialist, and sometimes it's very hard to convince them to do something. We talked about the general, like saying that every developer has to, or not maybe has to, but in my experience, what have worked for me is that I learned one thing very well, then I learned next thing. So it's not like going all hands to many different technologies at the same time. But at the end, there are some concepts, in my opinion, that every developer should learn. I can say should here because I do believe that they should learn some concepts. Before saying mine, what do you think actually they should learn? Do you have some things that you wanna say that each developer, doesn't matter they are specialist or generalist, they should know about?
Yeah, I mean, there are basics of programming, like for example, how to write algorithm and data structures, things like that. On a basic level, I think everyone should know how to do it and how to split the code correctly into like different methods and having like single responsibility and smaller classes. How like basics of object-oriented, I think are really helpful. Also testing, I think testing is really important to know because also again, not like a specific framework, but how to like the kinds of tests like unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests, and how to create methods that are easily testable and what kinds of parameters to pass to the methods to make the tests run better. And then I guess like this is more generic, I would say, but then like if you want to like go to the backend or go to the front end and be like more specialized in one of them, then of course there are like specific things. For example, on the backend, like I said, if you work on the backend, you need to know at least one database, like a relational database. It's really important to know, and maybe also like a non-relational DB just to know how difference and how they work. And Docker is like a must, like for most things nowadays. Really? Yeah. Why?
I don't know. I mean, you can still build things without Docker.
Yeah, but like professionally speaking, if you want to work like in modern companies and companies that are like up-to-date with technology, you kind of have to use it, right? I mean, if you want to work with Pascal and do it for 20 years, then sure.
No, thanks. I don't want to go back. I want to go forward. That's why I said we can. I mean, we can argue that the technologies that we are using, or maybe the concepts that they are developed like many years ago, and we are starting some of them. Like we are just starting to use some of them that are developed many years ago. So it's like a bit, I don't know. Like we are using already the old technologies, let's say.
Yeah, but if you think about programming languages, most languages that we use right now are at least like 10 years old or something, or even more. Because like there wasn't like really like a breakthrough in language technology or something like that. Like there's no like revolutionary language that solves everything. So we had new frameworks. I think new frameworks come all the time and new tools. Those are I think are the ones that are better to keep an eye on. But languages, like I said, I'm not really passionate about any language. And I think most of them are like really similar, both in the way that you write code and also like performance and stability and security. So yeah, but
it's more important than how do you write them, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Then you face many different problems. Yeah, for example, I use Swift programming language in iOS, and now we are using Kotlin in the backend, and the switch was incredibly easy for me. It's like they are really similar, actually.
Yeah,
that's very good. Also, like since we talked about like learning Pascal and trying to find a job with Pascal, like the one last thing I want to talk about is finding a job, because this is another case. Since we said that being a full stack developer is a little bit different than being a generalist developer. And most of the time I struggle, at the moment at least, that I say I know different technologies. And I know mobile, I know backend, I have experience in both sides. And I made a career switch in there. And now I'm not very comfortable if I want to change a job. Just because, do I want to go like write an iOS, or do I want to write a backend? Then can I apply to some job with, I don't know, Ruby or Python? Like how can I decide then? Should I be a consultant, for example? I don't know. What do you think?
Again, this is interesting because I've seen people change jobs because they don't like the company, for example. They want to work for another company, and then they choose the company no matter which technologies they use, because they like the company, they like the culture, they like the location, something like that. And I've seen people look for companies because they use a specific language or a specific technology, and that's also like pretty common. And I think like also both approaches are valid. It really depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for a job, if you're a generalist, it may be actually a bit. You have more flexibility to choose because you're not like focused on one technology. For example, if you consider yourself a specific specialist in one language, then you can choose a company that uses any other language because you adapt. But if you really want to work like one particular language, I guess on one hand, maybe you get a better salary because maybe the company is looking for a specialist in that particular language. And if you know that particular language well, for example, even old languages like COBOL or Pascal, then you can get a lot of money. But then your choices are limited to the companies that use that.
Yeah.
And most companies, like most that have like this startup profile, even though they're not startups, usually they don't care much about, I guess they don't care much about the technologies that the candidate knows. Like, for example, when I made the interview at Jimdo, when I had the interview, they asked me to choose which technology I wanted to use for the pair programming session because I asked which technologies they use, but then they let me choose. I chose TypeScript because, like I said, this is something that I'm familiar with, and I use it for it's like my general language to solve problems. That's what I chose. But then the company used Kotlin mostly for the backend, and that's fine. I mean, I'm fine. I didn't choose Jimdo because of the technology. I chose it because of the culture and the location, things like I said before. And but like I said, I also know a lot of people who change jobs because they like the technology, and then they choose companies that use that technology, and then they go to a job that has more challenges or that pays more, but then they choose that technology. Like I said, both approaches are have their pros and cons. I don't think it's like.
I'm really glad that you chose TypeScript for the pair programming. Just because in mobile team we were using TypeScript on the backend, and I have to guess that this made you a member of a mobile team, not the other teams. So not for the company, but you joined mobile team because I remember they said they are like the people who interviewed you. They said, yeah, Ricardo knows TypeScript and we very well. And that's why we think it might be a good fit for the mobile. And we were looking for a backend engineer at that time. That maybe, I don't know, but I have to guess that. I'm really glad. I'm really glad. Yeah. That's all. Do you have anything you would like to add?
Actually, like I said, I think there are levels of generalism as a specialist. For me, also when I got bored of being just a Pascal developer, many people, when they do that, they study only new technologies. In my case, I decided I wanted to study something completely different. So I went to study administration instead of just software. And I think that was also an interesting choice for me, because I think being a generalist is not about only the technology, but also everything that's around it, because software is made by people and you have people everywhere. We have teammates, you have leaders, you have, if you're a manager, you also have people that you manage, and you have customers and you have users and you have other stakeholders from other teams. And I think this made also really influenced my career and my choices and the positions that I had, because I started paying attention to things that are not so just related to technology. And
for example,
planning. I think planning is a big part of software.
Yes.
And I think it's really helpful if developers know a little bit about planning, because then you are not reliant only on a manager to help you plan things. You can also do it yourself and self-manage, like many Scrum teams recommend that you do, or any agile methodology actually. And UX is also something that's not directly related to software, but it's very, very important. And I think everyone should know a little bit about UX, because on the front end, definitely, because you're building something directly for the user. But even on the back end, it's helpful because UX doesn't mean you have like a final user, because if you're developing an API, your user is your developer, like the developer that uses that API. So in the end, it's still a user. Of course, the concepts are completely different because it's not visual, but still it's something that the user has expectations about what your system does, and you need to deliver something that fulfills that expectation. And I think it's really helpful. So maybe UX, like the basics, is also something that I would add to my list of things that are nice to know if you're a developer, no matter which part of it you do, like especially if it's a front end, of course, because then it's like much easier.
Exactly. If you're developing front end, then it's kind of a must to know how you can improve the UX and the UI together.
Yeah, and also like studying administration also helped me. For example, when we start a new project, you only start a new project if it's worth doing that. And what I mean, like, you need to have a return of your investment. If you're paying money to develop something, and this money usually, when we are talking about software, is paying for developers. That's like where most money goes. Yes. But of course, it could also be like tools, or you can hire someone external, like a consultant for that, or you can hire some company, or you can pay for some service. There are many costs involved, usually people, most of them. And I think it's also nice that I went to this area studying administration, because this also helps me when I do something. If I have we always have an infinite amount of work as software developers, and you always have to prioritize like which projects are more important. And also this is really important. If you can calculate how much a project can return to you, like immediately on the long run, and create a cash flow for the project, then it's also really helpful. So I guess you can,
you can convince other people as well, right? So if you have in the company, if you would like to build something, and if you can do the cost analysis, is it gonna return the money that we are spending and more, then you can convince maybe CEO, if you are a CTO, or if you're still CEO, I think you need to convince yourself too, or your board, maybe, I don't know, your investors. So it will be easy, even if you're an engineer. Then I think it's also useful for the technical depth work that we maintenance that we do constantly. It's like we want to do the maintenance work all the time, of course, to make our services with the highest quality as possible. But we never do these cost analysis. I've never seen at least. This is my experience. And usually it's done, I would say, but usually managers do it because it's not something that most developers would be interested about. But if it's something that you, like you said, if it's something that a project that you're passionate about, maybe this is a way to convince people to do it. So I think it's pretty helpful. I agree.
Yeah, but then again, this is like extrapolating, because this is like a generalist, not a generalist only like in technology, but also studying other areas. And I could, of course, I could have, instead of studying administration, I could have spent like two more years of my life studying like some more technology. And of course, I would be better at technology, but maybe not better at other parts. So it's always, like I said, it's always a choice, and you have your time and what you choose to do with it. So
it's always a balance. It's always the trade-off that you need to choose which one you are trading, basically. That's all. Do you have anything else to add?
No.
Okay, we are coming to an end, and also our tradition starts from the concept that I took from the Ladybug podcast is the shoutouts. So the last round is basically, do you have something that you would like to shout out? Like something, it can be either book or person or some specific event, doesn't matter what it is, that you want to praise in front of others. Do you have something?
Sure. I have three things actually.
Wow.
One is a book that I've read recently, which is the Culture Map that you recommended. And I really recommend this book because it's like one of the best books that I've ever read. And a lot of what we discussed today can also be translated into the concepts of those book, of that book. And I think it's really helpful. Like everyone should read it, especially if you work in an international company with people from other countries and other cultures, you should definitely read it. And yeah, I really like it. And another one is a podcast because I like to learn about random things. And this is like the most random that you can get. It's like a podcast called Stuff You Should Know. And it's really popular. It's an American podcast. And it's literally about everything. Like I don't know, sometimes they talk about inventions and physics and day-to-day things. It's how things work, like everything. So yeah, it could be about biology or mechanics or physics or whatever. Yeah, they have thousands of episodes, and no matter what you think, you'll find it there. So I really recommend it.
So it's for generalists, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. The third one.
And the third one is a YouTube channel that I also like because it's also about science, but it's also like really random things, and it's not like a specific topic.
Yeah.
It's called Smarter Every Day. Right. It's like a channel that I really like because it's also it's also about everything. And I always like to learn about new things, no matter what area it is. So I tend to search for this kind of content that's not like super specific.
Yeah, that's a good channel. I was following something similar like Crookesacts. I'm not sure if I can pronounce it better. It should be a German word, but yeah, I'm learning German. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So my shout out this week is the bass guitar course, online course, talkingbass.net. I'm really glad that Mark, the owner of the website, is doing those sessions or the courses. I really like those courses. And that's amazing what he's doing. And I just wanted to give the shout out because I'm learning how to play bass guitar, as you might probably see in the background. And I want to keep it close so that I can grab anytime. Yeah. So that's it. Thank you, everyone, for watching, listening. And thank you, Ricardo, especially for being a guest and spending your time with us. Thanks a lot.
Sure. It was really cool.
Thanks a lot. So next week, we will talk about DevOps and SRE. That will be a surprise. And let's see how the DevOps engineers and SRE, like site reliability engineers, are developing their careers and how they approach to these topics. Okay, everyone. Thanks a lot for listening or watching. And see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.